Well, good morning. Welcome to Faith on Hill's online Sunday morning service. We gather together every Sunday morning at 10:30 a.m., both online and in person. Of course, online, we're at faithonhill.com. You can follow us at Faith on Hill on social media, and you can subscribe and like and all that with our YouTube channel, Apple Podcasts, or Spotify. You just have to search Faith on Hill Church. That we have our Sunday morning content there. We also have any other online content that we put out in person. We gather together on Sunday mornings. We have prayer, worship, community together. We study God's Word together. We have kids church and youth group that meets on Sunday mornings, and we also have youth group that meets during the week as well. You can check out faithonhill.com for more information. Now, we are going to talk today about one of the more well-known stories of the Bible. And one that stood out to me, not because of something I read, but something I saw. Franco Zeffirelli is one of the more well-known Italian directors ever. And he's notable for a couple of things. First, he did one of the probably top two productions of Romeo and Juliet. It's like his Romeo and Juliet and the Baz Luhrmann film from the 90s with Leonardo DiCaprio. Those are like the two best that I've seen. But he also did what I consider to be my personal favorite Jesus movie, which is, it was a miniseries on TV, Jesus of Nazareth, produced in the 70s. I love it. I watch it, around Easter time most years. I think that, yes, like, it's not the best portrayal of Jesus in terms of acting or how white and British the actor is, but I love, the film overall. And I remember as, a kid watching Zeffirelli's Jesus of Nazareth for the first time, the story of Lazarus. It's a well-known story. Spoiler alert, he dies and Jesus comes and raises him from the dead. And it stood out to me. It was stark because there was this scene where the formerly dead man comes out of the tomb, but he's still wrapped up in all the burial cloths. So he looks like this kind of mummy walking out of the tomb. And there was something so stark and visceral about it to me as a kid that has just always stood out. This is a story that people know, even if they aren't part of the church. In fact, in like a lot of fiction and stuff, Lazarus will be a reference to rising from the dead. Kind of like using the term like the phoenix, rising from the ashes, same idea. And in John chapter 11, verse 1, it says there was a man named Lazarus who was sick. Now he was from Bethany, the village of Mary and her sister Martha. This Mary, whose brother Lazarus now lay sick, was the same one who poured perfume on the Lord and wiped his feet with her hair. So we're getting an idea of who these people are, where they live. Bethany is very close to Jerusalem, kind of like Milwaukee to Portland, same idea. Now he is sick. And the sisters sent word to Jesus. And they said, Lord, the one you love is sick. So they're calling out to God. You love him. You care about him. He's sick. And it says that when he heard this, Jesus said, this sickness will not end in death. No, it is for God's glory, so that God's Son may be glorified through it. Now, Jesus loved Martha and her sister and Lazarus. So when he heard that Lazarus was sick, he stayed where he was 2 more days. Then he said to his disciples, let us go back to Jerusalem. Why is it that it is so emphasized how much Jesus loved Lazarus and Mary and Martha? Because Jesus' actions here seem so heartless. Jesus loved these people. He loved this family. He cared about these siblings. And Lazarus got sick. Why? Why did he get sick? Because people get sick. That happens. People get sick. People die. I don't mean to be blunt or brutal or uncaring, but people get sick. People die. That's just the world we live in. You hope that it's not tragic. You hope that it's not a little child. You hope that it's not somebody that you know and care about. But this is the reality. Everyone dies, and you're just kind of hoping you make it longer than most. But people get sick. That's how it goes. And Jesus waits. He doesn't stay. John's emphasizing how much Jesus cares about these people. And yet Jesus stays put for 2 days. He doesn't move. God's actions here have no reference to how much he cares about them. People feel that, right? In our grief, in our hurt, in our pain, we feel this. God, why could you do this to me? Why could you allow this to happen? Don't you love me? Haven't I done your will? Haven't I followed you? Why don't you care about me? And I get why people say that. And I've said it. And you've said it. We've all said it, right? We have had hurts and pains and trials and traumas. And we have called out to God, why is this happening? And what the apostle is saying here, he wants to make it so clear to you and to me and to anyone who ever reads this ever, is that Jesus staying put for 2 days has nothing to do with how much he loves Lazarus, his sisters, how much he cares about them, how much he wants God's best for them. None of that is affected by Jesus staying put. And we'll get to why he stays put in a minute. But then he says after 2 days, hey, let's go back to Judea. Remember, they have left Judea because every time they go there, Jesus' enemies are trying to kill him. And it got so bad that the last time they were there, leaders of the people picked up stones outside the temple to kill Jesus right then and there. And it says, verse 8, Rabbi, they said, that's his disciples, a short while ago, the Jews there tried to kill you. They tried to stone you, and yet you are going back. And Jesus answered, are there not 12 hours of daylight? Anyone who walks in the daytime will not stumble, for they are seen by the world's light. And when a person walks at night, they stumble, for they have no light. And what Jesus is basically telling them is not my time yet. So if I go there, it's okay. I know where I'm going. I know what I'm doing. It is time for me to do this work. And after he had said this, he went on to tell them, our friend Lazarus has fallen asleep, but I am going to wake him up. So Jesus knows, or it's reasonable to assume, that the illness has taken Lazarus. He's waited 2 days. He says, hey, we got to go wake him up. Let's get going. So then they travel down. And his disciples reply, if he sleeps, he will get better. But Jesus had been speaking of his death, but the disciples thought he meant natural sleep. So then he told them plainly, Lazarus is dead. And for your sake, I am glad I was not there, so that you may believe. But let us go to him. Then Thomas, also known as Didymus, said to the rest of the disciples, let us go so that we may die with him. Now, a couple of things about that. This is a tragic thing. Jesus cares about these people. It's reasonable that these folks were also friends with the 12, or many of the 12 disciples were friendly with these guys, that they cared about him too, right? And Jesus said, hey, I could have been there and I could have healed him, but now you're going to see this. And Thomas says to everybody else, all right, let's go and die with him. I want to say this about Thomas, and because I think this is true. I think one of the big bummers of Christianity is that Thomas, one of the 12 disciples, is known as Doubting Thomas. Did he doubt the Lord's resurrection after Jesus rose from the dead? Yes, he did. We talk about it, right? It's a part of the Easter story. Jesus rises from the dead. He's seen by the faithful women. He's seen by most of the disciples. Thomas wasn't there. He doesn't believe. He doubts. But that's not everything about him. And I think it's such a shame that we boil everything about him down to this one event. Thomas was the one who told the other disciples, let's go and die with him. He had such devotion and dedication to Jesus that he said, wherever he goes, I will go, even if it means my death. And Thomas went as far as India, according to tradition and history, and that the church in India was founded by Thomas in the name of Jesus. Here's a guy who did incredibly impactful things for Jesus. Here's a guy who had great faith in Jesus. Here's a guy who went to Jerusalem knowing it could mean his death. And we just call him Doubting Thomas. I think that's a shame. And it makes me wonder, are there other people in our lives that we do the same thing to? Are there other people in our lives that we limit, that we pinhole into one thing, and God's work in their lives is so much bigger than that? Anyway, that's not what we're talking about, but it's something to think about. So they get going. Remember, for 2 days, Jesus waited. It had nothing to do with his love for this family. It had nothing to do with action or inaction. People think, oh, he waited. He was inactive. Remember the story of the man who came to Jesus and said, my child is sick. And if you just say the word, you don't even have to go. If you just say the word, it'll be done. And Jesus said, hey, your faith is awesome. Your child is well. And the man goes home, and on the way there, his servants come and meet him and say, hey, your child's better. And he finds out that it was the exact moment that Jesus had said, your child is well, that his child got better. Jesus didn't even have to be there. Don't think that Jesus needed to have some kind of physical proximity to Lazarus for him to have been healed. That's not true. Jesus could have healed Lazarus of his illness before he died, right then and there. Jesus could have raised Lazarus from the dead, right then and there. Now, there were certain physical realities that needed Jesus to be there. But this could have happened, is what I'm saying. But he says to the disciples, you guys get to see this. Sometimes there are things that go on and we go, oh my gosh, what is happening? What is happening? We're freaking out. And God's going, this is great. You guys are going to see something cool. So they go, they travel on their way. And it says in verse 17 that on his arrival, Jesus found Lazarus had been dead and in the tomb for 4 days. It's at about day 3 that the human body fully starts the decomposition process. In the heat and in the whole thing about, the time of year and everything, the body is going to be decaying, it's going to smell terrible. All of these things are true. Also, you can't survive more than 3 days without water. If Jesus had come and raised him from the dead, like he did raise others, people could have said, oh, they were just sleeping, they were, mostly dead, they were in a coma, they weren't doing well, but they were healed, but not raised from the dead. Oh, if he'd been dead for a couple of days, they could have said the same thing. And we hear these stories where somebody's pronounced dead, they're put in the body bag, and then the coroner opens it up and they find the guy's still alive or something like that. This kind of thing happens, but not after 4 days, because the human body can't survive more than 3 days without water. Had Lazarus been in some kind of coma, had been near the point of death, but not actually dead, he would have died of dehydration after the 3rd day in the tomb. They get there, it's the 4th day. And Bethany was less than 2 miles from Jerusalem, and many Jews had come to Martha and Mary to comfort them in the loss of their brother. And when Martha heard that Jesus was coming, she went out to meet him, but Mary stayed at home. Lord, Martha said to Jesus, if you had been here, my brother would not have died, but I know that even now God will give you whatever you ask. So she says, look, I know if you had been here, things would have been different, but even now you could do something. And then Jesus said to her, your brother will rise again. And Martha said, well, I know that he will rise again in the resurrection at the last day. So she comes to Jesus looking for hope, and he gives her hope. But she thinks he's talking about eternal things. Somebody dies, somebody passes away, and we think, well, I'll see them again. Oh, you know what? They believed in Jesus. I'll see them again. I was thinking about our friend Stephen, who just passed away recently. And he loved the Lord. He had faith. And I know I'll see him again. But I miss him. I have an eternal hope of seeing him again. I have eternal hope of seeing my dad again. As much as I want to see Steve again, I'm much more excited to see my dad again. My dad died when I was in middle school, but he had great faith in Jesus. I believe I will see him again at the resurrection of all things. And so she's comforted by this eternal hope. But Jesus is also offering current hope. Jesus said to her, I am the resurrection and the life. Whoever believes in me will live even though they die. And whoever lives by believing in me will never die. Do you believe this? And she said, yes, Lord. I believe that you are the Messiah, the Son of God who has come into the world. Jesus isn't just offering eternal hope, although he is. He's offering current hope, present hope, hope in this moment. Somebody says, well, I want to become a Christian so I can go to heaven. That's a great thing to think about, your eternal destination. But do you realize that Jesus is offering hope in this moment? Jesus is offering victory and life change and power in this moment. And that is what he's bringing to Martha. And after this, she went back and called her sister Mary aside and said, the teacher is here and he is asking for you. Martha is impacted by Jesus and she goes and grabs somebody else. That's what telling people about Jesus is all about. Oh, I need to take a class. I haven't been trained. What do you need training for? You know Jesus. Jesus has changed your life. Go tell somebody. And so Martha grabs Mary, and Mary comes back. And Jesus had not yet entered the village. He's still outside. But he was still at the place where Martha had met him. And when the Jews who had been with Mary in the house, comforting her, noticed how quickly she got up and went out, they followed her, supposing she was going to the tomb to mourn there. So basically they think, oh, she's going back to the tomb. She's so overcome with grief that she's just going to cry and sob at the tomb. And when Mary reached the place where Jesus was and saw him, she fell before his feet and said, Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died. It's interesting. Again, pigeonholing people. Thomas, we call him Doubting Thomas, even though just a minute ago we've seen a demonstration of his great faith in Jesus. His great devotion to Jesus. Mary and Martha are in another story in the Gospels. And it was in that time that Mary had great faith and Martha did not. But here, Martha says, Lord, even now you can do something. Mary is like, oh, if you had only been here, but it's too late now. Who has the greater faith in this moment? The story, the narrative, the stereotype is that Thomas is a doubter. But here we see him having great faith. The story, the narrative, the stereotype is that Mary has great faith and Martha does not. But we see the narrative flipped right here. And Jesus saw her weeping, and the Jews who had come along with her were also weeping, and he was deeply moved in his spirit and troubled. And he said, where have you laid him? Come and see, Lord, they replied. And Jesus wept. And the Jews said, see how he loved him. But some of them said, could not he who opened the eyes of the blind man have kept this man from dying? Jesus wept. He knows he's going to go raise Lazarus from the dead. He knows how this story ends. He knows that we're about to have an amazing turnaround, happy ending. Why is it that he's weeping? Because he cares about these people. Because he's so moved with love and compassion for them that his human response is to weep with them. There's no shame in crying. There's no shame in being overcome with hurt for people. Jesus is fully God. He's also fully human. And but I also think the fully God part of him weeps and cares and concerns. And if you think that God doesn't care about what's going on in this world right now, you are mistaken, my friend. If you think that God doesn't weep and grieve as he sees the hurt and the pain that humans deal with and inflict on each other, I don't think you've read the Bible. So they go and they find the tomb. And some of them who are watching this whole thing are saying, hey, he really did care about this guy. But others are like, well, he gave the blind man sight. Why couldn't he keep him from dying? Which is stupid criticism, by the way. What you're doing is you're acknowledging that Jesus gave the blind man sight. And if Jesus gave the blind man sight, shouldn't that be enough to believe in him? Jesus, once more, deeply moved, came to the tomb, and it was a cave with a stone laid across the entrance. So they had basically got this cave, and this is like the family tomb, and you would roll the stone away, and you'd put a body in, and then you'd roll it back over, and that was the place where they kept their dead. Lord, Martha said, the sister of the dead man, by this time there is a bad odor, for he has been there for 4 days. Now my wife remembered that in the old King James Version, it says, Lord, he stinketh. And I was like, that can't be. That's like a joke, right? Like not everything in the old King James is eth and, this eth and thoueth and all that kind of stuff. I went and looked it up this morning, and it does say that. It was awesome. We laughed really hard this morning at the breakfast table. It does say, he stinketh in the old King James. I like what the New King James says. There is a stench. Basically, she's like, look, the human body's decomposing. We all know how this goes. You open that thing up, he is not going to be in a good place. He will be starting to rot and decay, and it stinks. Why are we doing this? And Jesus said, did I not tell you that if you believe, you will see the glory of God? And so they took away the stone, and Jesus looked up and he said, Father, I thank you that you have heard me. I know that you always hear me. But I said this for the benefit of the people standing here, that they may believe that you sent me. And when he had said this, Jesus called in a loud voice, "Lazarus, come out." Now, did he need to yell to make it more powerful? Like I said earlier, Jesus did not need to have some kind of physical proximity to raise Lazarus from the dead. It didn't make it more holy that he shouted, right? I think there are people who think preaching is more powerful, prayer is more effective if we shout, if we stomp, if we do these things. I kind of think it's just practical. Hey, I want you to be able to hear me. I want everybody to be able to hear me. And so he calls out, "Lazarus, come out." And the dead man came out. His hands and his feet were wrapped in strips of linen, and the cloth was around his face. And Jesus said to them, "Take off the grave clothes and let him go." I want you to think about this. Jesus didn't just bring life back into his body, but he restored his body. Lazarus' physical body would have been rotting and decaying. Jesus didn't just heal him of whatever illness took him. He didn't just bring life back into his body. He would have had to physically restore his body from the death and decay. Otherwise, he would have looked like a zombie corpse walking around. I've said this before. The truth is that if Jesus had chosen to heal my dad, he would have also have had to heal him of an opioid addiction. Not because my dad was an addict, but because there was so much morphine being pumped into his system in the last days of his life that physiologically my dad died an opioid addict. Now, I don't mean that to throw shade at him or anything negative. That's just a reality as part of hospice care to keep the patient comfortable, that there's a lot of painkillers happening. So think about the work that Jesus did. He did not just bring him back from the dead. He also physically restored his body. Jesus could have done this and never left where he was. He could have done this without coming there. But somebody needed to roll away the stone. Somebody needed to know that they could basically free Lazarus from the bonds of the burial clothes he had been wrapped in. People needed to see it. And so by Jesus waiting and then going, all of those practical things were taken care of, and there were more people who were able to see and be blessed by and be captured by the work of God. It says, "Therefore many of the Jews who had come to visit Mary and had seen what Jesus did believed in him." There were many who believed because of this. And if Jesus hadn't come, they would not have believed. Some people who say, "I believe that Jesus is coming back. Why hasn't he come back yet?" Because there are still people that need to believe. Others say, "Why is it that God has allowed this thing to happen?" Because there are still people who need to believe. Others say, "Well, why did God cause this to happen?" Do you see anywhere where God caused this to happen? I see where God allowed this to happen. Because there were still people who need salvation. And many believed because of this. In fact, there is a reasonable argument that everything that happens with Palm Sunday and Hosanna, Hosanna, blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord is springboarded from this moment. Jesus has demonstrated his power. He's healed the sick. He's given sight to the blind. He's fed the hungry. But here's a guy dead for 4 days that Jesus raises from the dead. And if Jesus can raise Lazarus, what can't he do in your world? What limit is there for what God can do? Now, has Jesus raised the dead? Yeah, I believe he still does from time to time. I know people who were dead and came back. I know people who were riddled with cancer, and then one day there was no cancer. I know these things happen. God was glorified, and Jesus' message of hope and life change and eternal salvation spread because my dad died. I know people who became Christians because my dad's testimony in his death. I also know people who had the same thing that happened because my friend's mom was healed miraculously of a similar cancer. And God's work happened because there are people that need to be saved. And you might think that your parents or your child or your cousin or your best friend or your spouse or whoever is too far gone. If Jesus can raise Lazarus from the dead, what can't he do in your life? What limit is there? You may think there is no hope for you. Oh, God will forgive me. I'll go to heaven. But you know what? For this addiction, for this bondage of sin, for this broken relationship, for this pain, for this bitterness, for this trauma, there's no hope or healing. And I don't believe that is true. I believe that Jesus saves the lost. I believe that Jesus rescues those who are in captivity. I believe that Jesus gives sight to the blind, and I believe that Jesus can heal all that is broken. And one of the great things that we believe is that Jesus sends the Holy Spirit not just to give comfort, although we thank God for that comfort, but to give power. And that power that raised Lazarus from the dead, that power that raised Jesus from the dead, is the same power that is working in the church now. And we need it more than ever before. The church in America needs Jesus. The church in America needs the power of God spreading through it. And we need that same power. And that is the hope that we believe in and that we proclaim, that Jesus died and rose from the dead so that Lazarus and you and me might live. Lazarus died eventually, by the way. Lazarus eventually died. You know, had God healed my dad, what's to say that he wouldn't have died 10 years later in a car accident, right? Eventually, every person dies. But we will live for eternity because of the work of Jesus Christ. Hey, Pastor Adam here. I want to say thanks for joining us this Sunday. We are always glad to have you with us. We meet together every Sunday morning at 10:30 a.m., both online and in person. You can support the work that God is doing here by going to faithonhill.com and checking out our giving page. If you need prayer, encouragement, hope, know that Jesus is here for you and Jesus is with you. And you don't need to talk to anybody else. You can just open up your Bible and see what Jesus has to say. But we'd love to talk with you, pray with you. You can email us, office@faithonhill.com. All right, we'll see you next time as we gather together and continue studying the Gospel of John.